Fall time bass fishing can be absolutely one of my favorite times of the year to fish. And one of the biggest reasons is that you don't have near as many anglers out there on the water. You have a lot of them in the woods this time of the year, even watching football this time of the year. And so you have a lot of water to yourself and you don't have to deal with the pleasure boaters. Now, during the fall, I like to keep things pretty simple when it comes to my lure choice. So in this video, I'm actually gonna go over my top 5 lures for the fall time, so stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one. This video is brought to you by Omnia Fishing, and specifically the Omnia Pro app. One of my absolute favorite features that the Pro app has is its waypoint function. This is something that is really unique, and it's something that has actually replaced me keeping a lot of notes and Excel sheets like I used to do back in the day. Anytime I catch a fish, no matter what lake I am fishing, I always pull up my Omnia app and I will actually make a waypoint in that app. And what Omnia's app does is it actually takes all the current conditions that you are experiencing and it will automatically attribute all that to that specific waypoint. That way I can look at waypoints and kind of see what was happening when I was catching fish in that specific area. Now, not only that, something that is really cool that Omnia's Pro app is now doing is that you can actually import all of your waypoints from your different units into the Omnia app, and it will take data from up to 10 years in the past and actually, again, attribute all your weather conditions that happened on that day that you made that waypoint to all those waypoints. It just provides you with a lot more information, which can help you to catch a lot more bass when you get out there on the water. So if you guys want to check out that Omnia Pro app, I'm going to leave some links down below in the description. I greatly appreciate it. Now, when it comes to the lures that I like to use for fall, let's be real honest here. There is a number of different lures that can work depending on where you live in the country, what types of waters that you fish. The 5 lures that I have selected, I feel like apply to a lot of different lakes and ponds and rivers. So that's why I've selected them. But just know that this isn't a complete list. It may be vastly different depending on where you live in the country. Now, let's start with lure number 1, which is probably my favorite lure of all time, and that is the simple jig and pig. The jig is actually a bait that I have tied up with me throughout the entire year. And one of the biggest reasons is that it mimics pretty much everything that a bass eats. You can make a jig look like a shad, you can make a jig look like a bluegill, you can make a jig look like a crawfish, and it's just a great bait year-round at catching big fish. Now, with that being said, during the fall, there are a couple of patterns that I look for with a jig. Now, the first one is in the fall, a lot of times you start to have a little bit more rain and weather systems come through and it will muddy up some water. So what I like to do is look for those creek arms that have a little bit more muddy or stained water. I like to get up into those creek arms, and that's where I'm gonna just start flipping and pitching a lot of wood cover. This is a very fun way to go out there and catch some really big fish that are in shallow water. Now, what you will see a lot of times, especially later in the fall, is that there's a lot of lakes across the country that the lakes will actually do a winter drawdown. And so when that happens, those lakes will actually go down, 3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot. Some of them go down 30 and 40 foot, but a lot of these lakes will actually drop. Now, when I start to have cooler water temperatures and that lake starts to drop, one of my absolute favorite jig patterns to get on is fishing creek channel swing banks. Those same creeks that I just talked about where I like to look for that dirty water, as the fall kind of keeps on going, those fish are gonna start to pull out of those creek arms, and you will find a lot of these fish on these creek channel swings. So what I'm gonna do a lot of times, I'm gonna take like a 1/2 ounce football jig, I'm gonna fire it up on the bank, and I'm gonna kind of work it down that really steep stair step bank. This by far is one of my favorite ways to catch really big fish during the fall, and you can catch them in really cold water temperatures. I will do this exact same pattern even when the water temperatures are in the 40s. Now, lure number 2 is a punch rig. If your lake has grass in it, it has vegetation in it, maybe it's milfoil or coontail or hydrilla, A grass punching bite usually develops really well kind of in that late summer and early fall time. And you can actually do this throughout the entire fall. And one of the reasons that this actually gets really good in the fall is that as that water temperature really starts to cool off, you're gonna have a lot of undergrowth, a lot of grass that's under some of these under some of these mats that will start to die off. And so it really creates a lot of openings, a lot of canopies underneath the mats for the bass to get. Now, one of the most important things to understand about fishing matted vegetation, and this actually applies no matter what time of the year that you're fishing, is that a lot of times when you find bass in mats, they are going to be schooled up. So a lot of times when we think about schools, we think about like offshore fishing, fishing offshore structure. But when you are fishing mats, you will fish, you will fish mats for hundreds of yards, even miles at times. And then you will find a little section, a little mat. It may only be 20 yards long, maybe 30 yards long, where you will catch a number of bass. I see this all the time. You see it a lot during the fall. So when you go out there to flip and punch through matted vegetation, just keep that in your mind, because it can be a little bit hard to stay motivated out there on the water when you're just flipping and pitching and punching and you're not getting bit and you're not getting bit. But bam, as soon as you get bit, put the brake down. A lot of times I'm gonna put the Raptors down and I'm going to pick that mat apart, because you will be blown away at just how many bass will get in a small section under the mats during the fall. Now, lure number 3 is a spinnerbait. And a spinnerbait is really no secret to anyone. If you've ever picked up a bass fishing rod, you know what a spinnerbait is. But it does seem that a lot of guys don't fish a spinnerbait near as much as they used to. You know, with the invention of baits like, whopper ploppers and chatterbaits, a lot of guys are fishing those baits, but a spinnerbait can be an absolute deadly fall bait that I always have tied up with me. Now, one of the biggest reasons that a spinnerbait works so well is that a lot of bass, as that water temperature cools, they are going to feed up. If you have lakes, especially that freeze over, those bass do not feed as often during the winter months. And so they really do kind of feed up before it gets very, very cold. Now, one of the primary things that bass are going to eat is shad, threadfin shad and gizzard shad. And one of the perfect lures to throw when bass are feeding heavily on shad is a spinnerbait. Now, kind of like I talked about earlier, when I get on a good spinnerbait bite, a lot of times it is when I kind of go into some creek arms that have some off-color water. Kind of those same situations where I flip and pitch a jig. Now, what I have found over the years is that there will be times where you are in these creek arms that have this off-color water, you're looking at your electronics, and even though you may only be in 5 or 6 foot of water, you will see a lot of the bait fish that is suspended in the water column. It's sitting 2 and 3 foot down. In those situations where I see a lot of suspended bait fish, to me, that is when I like to pick up that spinnerbait over a jig. I've actually seen days out there on the water where a lot of bass will be suspended in wood cover, and you can flip and pitch a jig and you will actually be working your jig below the fish. And so picking up that spinnerbait, you can fish it kind of in the same water level that those bass are at, and I'm telling you, it can be an absolute phenomenal bite. Now, over the years, one of my favorite spinnerbaits has become the Berkley Power Blade. The reason that I like this particular spinnerbait is because the hook on this power blade actually sits back a lot further than most spinnerbaits out there on the market. And so I actually don't use a trailer hook with this spinnerbait, and it comes through wood cover really, really nice. So it's just a perfect bait for me to be able to fish efficiently in that muddy water around a lot of wood cover. Now, lure number 4 is probably my favorite of all the baits. And I also think it's the one that applies to most bodies of water, and that is a buzzbait. A buzzbait is absolutely, every single time I go fishing in the fall, gonna be on the front deck of my boat. No matter where I'm fishing, whether it's a pond or a river or a lake, I'm gonna have a buzzbait with me. And kind of like the jig, it's just a very versatile bait. You can fish it in muddy water, you can fish it in clear water, you can fish it on the outside of grass, you can fish it down a rock bank, you can fish it down a wood bank, you can fish it around docks. And that's what I like to do a lot of times when I am fishing a buzzbait. I'm just gonna fish it everywhere. I'm gonna go down the bank, I'm gonna fish that buzzbait. Now, when it comes to fishing a buzzbait, typically the colder that the water gets in the fall, the slower I am going to reel my buzzbait. So just keep that in mind, because you can actually kind of overwork your buzzbait when you're fishing in really cold water. I really like to slow it down. Now, I typically keep my buzzbait fishing pretty simple. I thread a toad onto a buzzbait a lot these days, and I keep my colors really simple. I like a black toad, I like a white toad, and I like a green pumpkin toad. Those are about the only colors that I'm gonna fish. And when it comes to the blades, I think most of the time it does not matter what color your blade is. If you're fishing in really clear water, it might make sense to try to change the blade up to see if bass like one or another, but I think most of the time you're fishing, the blade is simply the attractant. It is what draws the fish into the buzzbait, and then they're going to kind of hone in on your plastic. Now, lure number 5, I cannot get this one off my list because it really becomes so deadly in cold water, and that is the jig head minnow. Now, I know for a lot of anglers out there, you think that this is only a forward-facing sonar technique, and for the most part, it definitely helps to have a forward-facing sonar where you can really track that bait and watch those fish hit it, but this is not just a technique for forward-facing sonar. I'll actually explain a little bit more about that in the video where I kind of break down the jig head minnow and what I like to throw, everything about it. So if you're interested in learning more about this technique, I'm gonna leave a video right here that you can watch next. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, and I will see you guys in the next one.